The core of wokeness is to say, we are bad, we are evil.
And the only thing that wokeness has to offer in exchange is to brainwash bright young minds like you to believe that what you must do to improve the world is to complain, is to protest, is to throw soup on paintings.
You wrote a radical moderate manifesto. It's this idea that actually maybe being an independent is probably a pretty good idea.
I couldn't give less of a shit about diversity. I don't think it's important. I don't need a diverse army. I want an army that's good at killing the enemy.
You are an immigrant. You did live in Russia. Putin and Russia have been all over the news, but you've written pieces where you basically have said, listen to what he is saying in his own words. Here is why he is mad.
They want to change the global world order. They don't like the fact that America is the most powerful country in the world.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is Bitcoin.
I'm afraid I'm going to trigger you and the entire audience by saying that I get the feeling that this is...
All right, guys, bang, bang. I've got Konstantin here with me. Konstantin, you've got this viral speech from Oxford that's been going around the internet. And I wanted to unpack a couple of things that you said in there, most namely the idea that free speech is the foundation of Western civilization. That seems to be an idea that completely has gotten lost. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more in terms of why you think that is the foundation of Western civilization?
Well, obviously, it's not entirely true in the sense that Western civilization existed at times when we didn't have free speech in the way that we would hope to have. But my broader point is this, the Enlightenment values that are the product that create you get the scientific revolution and the technological and scientific progress that we enjoy in the West relies upon people's ability to express controversial ideas that other people are not going to like. I mean, if the obvious and hack example of this would be, the sun does not revolve around the earth. Well, there was a period of time when people would get severely punished for saying that. And now we know that is true. So in my opinion, the success of the West relies in part, not entirely, of course, but in a large part on the ability to allow the market to decide many things. And that applies to economics, but it also applies to ideas. I was born in the Soviet Union and later lived in Russia. And Russia and China are two countries which are obviously very powerful in the world, but they have not been able to be as technologically and scientifically successful, despite having very, very bright and talented people. And part of the reason is that you cannot do science by government diktat. You can't do research by some apparatchik or Mandarin somewhere deciding what should and shouldn't be looked into, what is the right course, etc. And I think for that reason alone, but there are many others, of course, too, the idea that we should be able to discuss ideas that people don't like and express opinions people don't like is a foundation not only of freedoms that we enjoy, but actually more importantly, even than that, of the scientific and technological progress which drives our societies to succeed.
So you and I see eye to eye on this whole idea of you've got to be able to test a lot of things. You've got to be able to talk about a lot of different ideas, and eventually the market will coalesce around solutions to real problems, especially when it comes to science and technology. Are you worried that woke culture and cancel culture and kind of all of these relatively new movements, if you will, are actually putting that in jeopardy in the West as well? You mentioned Russia and China have kind of succumbed to the government oversight and prevented the free market from really getting to those science and technology innovations. Is that one of the big ideas that you're trying to push forward, is that woke culture is also going to stifle some of that innovation potentially?
Well, I mean, look around. If we can't decide what a woman is, how are we going to make technological and scientific progress and do research, right? And we have the case, I don't know whether it's the case where you are, but certainly in the UK, we have prominent scientists and biologists going on TV and being asked about this issue, and that it's controversial for them to express an opinion about biology. I know that is also true of other areas of research, and so I think that's really important that we live in a society that is more interested in the truth than people's feelings.
Yeah. As you were giving this speech, one of the things that you talked about was this wokeness movement really has convinced a lot of young people that they don't have agency, that they actually should complain rather than build or create. Why do you think so many young people are gravitating towards that? Is it simply because it's easier to complain than build, or is it something else?
I think it's a large number of things. And a lot of the coverage of my speech has been, comedian destroys woke culture with blah, blah, blah. And actually, I don't think that's what I was doing at all. I was challenging those young people to step up. I was not saying to them, you are just woke idiots and there's no point talking to you. I was talking to them precisely because I wanted to persuade them that they can be better and that there is a better way of doing things. But as to your question, why, I think there are many reasons. I think there are some legitimate reasons that young people feel disempowered. Again, I don't know whether if this is the case where you are, but in the UK, the housing crisis is a massive issue. Young people are priced out of buying their own home, and it's hard to expect people to, have an investment in their society if they literally cannot put roots down, cannot start a family, cannot pair up with someone else, cannot live where they'd like to live, etc. So I think that's part of the problem. And if you don't own your own home, if you don't have a family, if you're not looking after children who need you, etc., it becomes quite tempting to remain in that sort of infantile adolescent state for much longer than previous generations would have done. My parents had me at the age of 20. I had my first son at the age of 39. Like, that's the difference. And I'm part of this generation too. So that, I think, is part of it. Another part of it, you're right, man. Look, it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to just complain than to do stuff. And of course, social media technology enables that as well. And then there's a failure of parenting over successive generations. I mean, if you think about it I've been thinking about this quite a bit. If you think about it from a teenager's point of view, an adolescent's point of view, you don't really have anything of your own. You can't really go out and create anything, can you? Like, what you can do is say to mom or dad, can I have some pocket money? And if dad says no, well, what options do you have, really? Like, in the old schools, in old days, you could get a paper round. That's not really available as much to younger people nowadays, that sort of thing. So what are you left with? Well, you whine and complain until daddy gives you the money. And daddy nowadays will give you that money if you whine and complain long enough. So it's the coddling. It's Jonathan Haidt has written about this beautifully. It's the coddling of the American mind. It's the fact that, as I said on Tucker the other day, we live in a society where adults are afraid of children. They're afraid of young people. And, increasingly with good reason. I mean, if you look at the fact that if you are in a position where you operate in some kind of institution, whether that's a college or a school or a corporation, 5 20-year-olds with blue hair can get together and get you kicked out after a long and distinguished career. So we are a society in which young people have a lot of power, and that power mainly comes from their ability to punish you for not giving them what they want. So why wouldn't they use that power?
How much of your ability to talk about this stuff, to have it resonate, to have the speech go viral, is because you are a comedian or a satirist and you're able to kind of say things and almost be in a protected class? I think a lot about comedians may be some of the last people who are accepted by society when they say the truth because it makes us all laugh, versus if somebody was at a corporate job or a politician and they said the same exact thing, wokeness or cancel culture would go after them. Does that play a part of it?
No, people come after me as well. I think, again, this is different in America. I'm pleased to say, when we were on Joe Rogan's show, we went to his comedy club afterwards, and you could see that, the freedom that we all associate, the freedom of speech with America, is still alive. In the UK, it's not the case. Most comedians are pussies, and they won't say anything. They won't challenge the narrative. And that's because they're afraid. And so I don't think it's so much that. The reason I can say what I say is I don't give a shit, man. I've got my own YouTube show that we built with my colleague Francis from the ground up. If YouTube cancel us, which they won't, but if they did, we'll find somewhere else and we make it work. Like, I don't rely on anyone. I don't need anyone. I don't need the media. I don't need the mainstream media. The only thing I need is to keep saying what I think. Our audience love the show. They reward us for doing what we do. That's it. I think really the truth is the only people who can speak freely now are people who are uncancelable too. And look, everyone is cancelable, depends what you do, of course, and what you say. But generally speaking, if I'm out there expressing what I think are rational, reasonable opinions, I'm not afraid to get canceled, not because I'm a comedian, but because I have my own thing that protects me from that.
What's been fascinating about the response is obviously there's virality to it, so that leads to controversy and debate. But you've been pretty outspoken and transparent about some of the responses that you've gotten. Many of them have been quite rude, negative, pretty aggressive and abrasive, but also not only from individual citizens, but you made a comment recently online where you haven't been invited on any left-leaning media outlets. It's pretty much only been right-leaning media outlets. Is that just bad for their business model, and so they're kind of trying to protect their bottom line? Is it something where they don't actually want to have the debate? Why do you think it is that there seems to be this line in the sand on the political spectrum, and you're really only being engaged with on one side?
I'd love to know the answer to that question, man. I really would, because I always joke that I identify as politically non-binary, and that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I'm not a team player in that sense. I don't want to be on team blue or team red. I try to think about the issues independently. And I think the idea that if you have a certain view of abortion, you must have a certain view of guns, a certain view of this, a certain that, I think that's crazy to me. Like, how are they connected? They're not, so I try to take the issues independently. But you're right. We live in a society, it seems to me at least, where someone like me who's prepared to challenge the right on the things that they get wrong will still get invited on right-wing media. But if I challenge the left on where they go wrong, they won't have me on. And that is a failing of theirs. I think like we just talked about, they're afraid of their audiences. They're terrified that anyone with any heterodox opinion is going to be coming on, and their audience is going to have a backlash against that. And who knows, maybe they're right. I mean, if their business model is built on feeding their audience only things that they want to hear, they're right not to bring me on. And long may it continue, because shows like yours and shows like mine are going to thrive.
As you have built your show, what are some of the things that you've noticed that you may be allowed to do other than just speak your mind that you wouldn't be able to do if you worked for a large corporation? Are there certain types of guests? Are there certain business models? What else have you seen that really allows for kind of ultimate freedom that you're describing?
Well, I think one of them is what we're doing right now. I actually get invited on TV a lot nowadays, and I don't do as much of it as I used to. And part of the reason is like, once you've had this, we jokes like once you've got the heroin of a long-term conversation, why would you drop down to methadone? You know what I mean? Like, this is so much more fulfilling and satisfying. We're sitting here for a good chunk of time. You're giving me the space to speak. You're not talking over me. You're not trying to make me look bad. You let me make myself look bad if that's what happens. But that's the way we do things. And if I was working in some sort of corporate media, you get 3 minutes to make one point. And look, there's a market out there for that. And I'm not saying those people shouldn't exist, but I enjoy this. I enjoy having a conversation. I enjoy really connecting with somebody, getting to know how they think, getting to know how I think, disagreeing where there's disagreement, but doing it in a constructive way, as opposed to going for the clickbait and all of that. So that is a really fulfilling part of doing trigonometry. For me, we get to interview fascinating people, left and right. We've had the Jordan Petersons and the Douglas Murrays and all the Bill Burrs and all sorts of different people, comedians, stand-ups, satirists, authors, anything, name it. And we just sit and learn. What a great thing to do for a living, man, is to talk to people you find interesting. I almost think I don't know if you find this, but I almost find that it's very rare for me to have as meaningful a conversation off of the show as it is on the show. How many people get the opportunity to sit down with a great mind for an hour and just engage and speak and listen and think about the world? Like, to me, that is incredibly gratifying. And I don't think if I was hosting something on TV or if I was involved in a TV thing, I'd get a chance to do that.
I feel exactly the same. And actually, I've had friends stop me at dinner and they're like, hey, you're asking me questions as if I'm on the show. Because what you start to realize is a lot of conversations, they're pretty surface level. You don't actually talk about meaningful things, even if you are with smart people when you're in more social settings. And so I just tend to want to have the more meaningful conversation, which leads to kind of better questions. So it's always funny when they remind me, hey, it's okay to chill out and just have a social time. One of the things I read online that I was fascinated by is you wrote a radical moderate manifesto. And it's this idea that actually maybe being an independent is probably a pretty good idea. Can you describe a little bit what that radical moderate manifesto entails?
Well, the Radical Moderate Manifesto is, I think, something that most people would have agreed on 20 years ago. But the way that the culture has gone is that has changed a lot. I mean, to me, there are some very basic principles. One of them is I couldn't give less of a shit about diversity. I don't think it's important. I'm a first-generation dark-skinned immigrant in the UK. I don't want to be given a leg up. I don't want to be given a hand up. I don't need to be a victim. I want the opportunity to compete on merit, right? And the thing that I really rail against is when it starts to get introduced into things where it undermines the quality of the effectiveness or the output of that particular thing. So I don't need a diverse army. I want an army that's good at killing the enemy. That's what I want, right? I don't need a diverse comedy, artificially diverse comedy industry. I need the best, the funniest people on stage in front of me, right? And wherever you look, the introduction of these arbitrary artificial targets, to me, often undermines the quality of the end product, which I'm against. But, the other stuff is, it's, like I say, obvious stuff. I want the police to enforce the law instead of policing jokes as we do in the UK and painting their patrol cars rainbow colors and whatever. I don't think that's what they should be doing. I think they should be prosecuting criminals, catching criminals, prosecuting them and putting them in prison and keeping them away from law-abiding citizens. There's all sorts of just very obvious things. I invite people to go and read the Substack piece that I put out. But I think that's something actually that the vast majority of people could easily agree upon until, you were the wrong person for thinking that, endlessly artificially changing the makeup of, the idea that a company's primary focus should be on making sure they have the right number of Russians or other immigrants or women or whatever. To me, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I happen with our YouTube channel to run a small business. We have a very diverse team. And that is because we don't care about diversity. We care if you're good enough. And if you live in a city like London, as we do, there's a lot of people of different types around. If you hire the best people, you're going to find a lot of them are different. They're all going to bring their own thing. And that is how it should be.
It's amazing how without the mandate, you actually may end up having a more diverse team than many of the teams who do have the mandates. And there's been a lot of talk in the United States about the mainstream media will critique these technology companies and say, hey, you don't have enough diversity. You don't have enough, A, B, C category that we think you should have. And then there was a study done that actually showed that the tech companies were more diverse than the mainstream media outlets. And so it ends up being this thing where when you have frontal offensive kind of fire, it actually is a distraction so that you don't get return fire, right? If you're constantly attacking other people, there tends not to be that much that blows back on you. And so I've always found that fascinating where if we agree that finding the best people is the goal, usually those organizations end up being quite diverse. And that leads me, I think, to this idea of like, you are an immigrant. You did live in Russia. Putin and Russia have been all over the news, but you've written pieces where you basically have said, listen to what he is saying in his own words. Here is why he is mad. Can you explain a little bit for people, especially here in the United States, who I think just get bombarded with good or bad, evil or positive, where you really took his words and I think highlighted nuance that a lot of Americans could probably learn from to better understand what the situation is between Russia, Ukraine, and kind of Putin's complaints? Hey guys, what's going on? I hope that you're enjoying this conversation. But I wanted to interrupt for a quick second and tell you about a brand new conference that I'm hosting on March 4th at the Miami Beach Convention Center. The event is called LYCEUM Miami, and tickets are completely free for anyone who wants to come. I'm bringing together many of the most popular guests from the podcast over the last couple of years. Some of the guest speakers that we've already announced are people like Vivek Ramaswamy from Strive Asset Management, or Delian and Mike Solana from Founders Fund, Chris Williamson from the Modern Wisdom podcast, Cody Sanchez from Contrarian Thinking, and billionaire Christian Augermeyer, among many others. I've got a number of amazing surprise guests as well, some that you definitely will not expect, and others that come from walks of life that you will be scratching your head as to how I even got them to show up. But come check out LYCEUM Miami on March 4th. The Lyceum was a public gym in Athens, Greece, where people used to come together, talk about ideas, and debate topics that were important to society. I want to meet people in person, in real life, once again, after 3 years of a hiatus from real life events. And so I'm hosting the event. And as I mentioned, anyone from anywhere can come to this event completely for free. All you need to do is go to LYCEUMmiami.com and you'll be able to pick up a free general admission ticket. Make sure you claim your ticket in order to get in through the doors. LYCEUM Miami is going to be a great time. So come check it out. Come hang out with me, many of the popular guests from the podcast, and other like-minded individuals. LYCEUM Miami, March 4th, Miami Beach Convention Center. I hope to see you there. All right, let's get back into this conversation.
Well, Putin's primary agenda, and he says it in his own words, and Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has expressed this many times, they want to change the global world order. They don't like the fact that America is the most powerful country in the world. They don't like that America influences a lot of policy around the world. They don't like that many countries around the world have to reckon with America when they're making certain decisions. And what they claim they want is a multipolar world. In other words, a world in which Russia, China, the United States are equals. Of course, that is not a stable construction, and they know it full well. What they want, to put it simply, is to throw America off its pedestal. That is what they want. They don't like, as Putin said in one of his speeches, the end of Western hegemony is inevitable. And this is the classic, I don't know if you're into combat sports, but I've really got into the UFC lately. It's the challenger who wants to throw down the gauntlet to the champion and knock him off his pedestal. And, I've been making the point for many, many years that wokeness, people think it's irrelevant. It's something that only happens online and whatever, but it's not. I mean, the core of wokeness is the direct destruction of Western self-confidence. The core of wokeness is to say, we are bad, we are evil, especially straight white men, but actually white women and this and that and the whatever. Anyone who's straight, anyone who's not. It's about fundamentally inculcating in our societies the feeling that we are somehow, we're questionable. And that is a bad thing, because what it does is it's like you're destroying your own immune system. And people have forgotten the world is not some kind of kumbaya, holding hands, unicorns and rainbows place. The world is a competitive place. It's a competition between different civilizations. And if we don't have the confidence in ourselves, if the champion, doesn't want to defend that belt, if the champion doesn't want to stand up in the cage and fight, someone else is going to come along who wants that belt.
When you see Putin saying these things, why do you think it is that Western media isn't covering it from that perspective? Is it because it makes them uncomfortable? It violates Okay, explain more.
Well, most of them don't speak Russian. Most of them don't have the time to listen to a 4-hour speech by Vladimir Putin or to read a transcript of one that I've made. Most of them don't have Russian speakers on staff. Most of them don't want to pay thousands of dollars to have his speeches translated. And if you're interested in clicks instead of the truth, well, why would you care what Vladimir Putin says? What you can say, you can do one of two things. You can do what CNN does, which is go, Vladimir Putin is the reincarnation of Hitler, or you can do what some people on Fox News, including Tucker, and I was on his show recently, but I disagree with him vehemently about his coverage of Ukraine, which has been fact-free, basically. And you can go, it's all our fault. We shouldn't have got and blame it on America or blame it on the Democrats or whatever, because that's what gets you the clicks. Getting to the truth is hard. It takes time. It takes energy. And I just think they're not very competent. And that's mainly the reason that they're not giving the American people the information that they need.
If you were made president of the United States for a year, how would you interact with Putin or respond to some of the things that he's saying? Is there like a clear path as to what you think the United States should do?
Well, I mean, that's super difficult. The real question is, what do you want? What outcome do you want? That's how you know what you want to do. So what are you trying to achieve? What position would you like to get to?
I think most people in the United States, whether rightly or wrongly, would say that they want to achieve peace. And there's a strong argument that maybe pursuing peace as kind of the holy grail may not be the best strategy. But let's just say that was the strategy, is to achieve peace. What do you think is the path there?
Well, the thing is, even that, with all possible respect, I've really enjoyed this interview and you're asking great questions, but that is kind of a bad question because, like I said this, we did an interview, my co-host Francis interviewed me on our channel the day the invasion happened. And that was, that got a lot of people watching it. And he said, like you, he said, how do you get peace? And I said, surrender. That's the quickest way to get peace, right? Like, if you come up to me in the street and demand my wallet and I go, what's the outcome here that I want? I want peace. Okay, hand over the wallet. Fine. You want to do that? The United States has the power to make that happen. If it pulls all support from Ukraine, the Ukrainians they'll get slaughtered and then surrender. Is that what the Americans want? You want to give America's number one enemy a win like that? And the confidence to keep going further? Is that what you think? You think that's not going to have long-term consequences down the line? Peace for its own sake is not necessarily the outcome, because you got to think long-term. And the long-term outcome here is you want peace, but what you also want to do is to prevent further aggression, because we've been down this road before. You've got to remember, Russia annexed pieces of Ukraine in 2014 and nobody did anything. And guess what? 8 years later, they come back. As soon as they felt that America had its eye off the ball, as soon as they felt confident that they could make further inroads. So from that perspective, I think peace is obviously the desired goal, but you got to think about what you're prepared to sacrifice to achieve it. And for my money, allowing someone to behave in this way and encouraging them to do so by letting them roll their tanks over Ukraine would be the worst thing that the United States could do here.
So you're highlighting a couple of the nuances that I find fascinating about the situation, which is peace. To your point, if you just surrender, the United States, at least the public statements, is that the United States is not engaged. We're providing support to another country. And I think that country would like it to be believed that they are making their unilateral decisions. And so therefore, even if the United States said to them to surrender, they would not. Who knows if that would happen or not. But to your point about preventing further future aggression, that then changes the chessboard a little bit, right? Because not only are you trying to achieve peace in the short term, but you actually are trying to serve as a deterrent. And one of the things that I've been very interested in is the use of U.S. sanctions as part of the strategy. And so what we have seen is that the United States has obviously gone very, very hard at Russia, unprecedented level of sanctions, but also got global coordination to hit them. But as we've watched that happen, it's thrown off commodity prices. We've actually seen an influx of trading volume with Russia. There's many other countries like China and India who've said we are not going to stop trading with them. We need wheat, we need oil, we need these things from them. And now there's even reports starting to come out that actually Russian oil originally was kind of being repackaged as Chinese oil and sold at twice the price to Germany and other countries. But now there's places in Singapore where there are reports coming out that literally the tanks and the different storage facilities are overfilled. They don't have enough space because people are taking Russian oil and they're mixing it, or they're kind of watering it down with other oil so that they can then sell it on the global market without having to say that it's Russian oil. When you start to see kind of the nuances and the complexity, is there a right answer? Like that's one of the things I keep coming back to here, right? Or is it just all trade-offs and actually there's a no-win situation? Like nobody wins when you have these kind of global showdowns.
I don't think that's true. I agree with like 99% of what you said. I think you made a great point. I think it's not, look, my favorite author at the moment that I've reading the most is Thomas Sowell. And one of his lines is there's no solutions, only trade-offs. And I think that's, of course, true. In terms of sanctions, people talk about sanctions as if sanctions are one thing. I think the sanctions on energy were quite idiotic and are not really hurting Russia. Then again, technology sanctions are very effective at preventing Russia from continuing high-tech manufacturing, making more advanced weaponry, etc. So you have to pick and choose what you're talking about when you're talking about sanctions. But in terms of, there are no winners, I disagree. I think it's very clear that there are two winners out of this. It's the United States and it's China. They are the two winners here. Russia and Ukraine are both bad losers out of this. India is not particularly happy, and this is sort of, I was talking to an Indian politicians recently. He sort of said it's a plague on both your houses with respect to Russia and America from their perspective. But yeah, look, I think what you're seeing more broadly, bigger picture, even if we take a step back, is, and Peter Zahan is very good on this, you're seeing the end of globalization. You know, this idea of, what was it called, like peace through trade or some other, or human rights through trade, or whatever bullshit that the West convinced itself about. You know, if we just let Putin's cronies launder their money through the city of London and buy super yachts in the West, you know, the Russians, they'll get civilized and they won't be, you know, the usual self and whatever. And if we just, you know, if we just build some factories in China and make all our widgets there, they're not going to put 1 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, and they're not going to suppress protests in Hong Kong, and they're not going to remain the Chinese Communist Party. They're going to become beautiful liberal Democrats like all of us wonderful people in the West. And that, my friend, is BS, as we've just found out, and we're going to continue to find out. You know, different civilizations have different cultures. And so that, I think, is the process that's happening. The global supply chains are breaking down. We saw during COVID that, like, when the shit hits the fan, you know, the Chinese are going to hoard the PPE. They're going to hoard the antibiotics. They're going to lie to you about the virus and where it came from and how it's spreading and all of that, right? And so rather than us exporting liberal democracy to these countries, instead we're importing Chinese-style authoritarianism when it comes to lockdowns and all of this other stuff. So the world is becoming, I think we're in for a period that is going to be, well, it depends where you are, of course, but globally is going to be quite a challenging period of time economically and in other ways. And as you say, it's a very complex situation. And that's why I asked you what you want, because there may be a right answer, but it really depends on where you want to get to.
When you look at the Western perspective of the world, do you think that there is a loss of confidence in the ability for the West, and specifically the United States, to kind of police the world? So you're talking about the collapse of globalization, and usually people will talk about manufacturing and trade and those types of things. But obviously a lot of that has thrived because of the United States' ability and appetite to run around the world and kind of police. As we see the fall of globalization from the manufacturing and trade standpoint, is your expectation that we will actually see the United States kind of contract that appetite in terms of policing the world? We obviously aren't going into Ukraine. We kind of are pseudo participating via support. But what is your expectation kind of moving forward for how the United States will participate in some of these more global or geopolitical events?
Well, it's hard to know, man, because, you know, unlike many other countries, the United States is still a democracy. And so you're able to elect people who can at least try to change the course of the country. I mean, I had obviously very profound disagreements with your previous president, as I do with this one. But the one thing that I think got him elected, whether you agreed with him or not, I just think it's a fact that the one thing that got him elected, and interesting to listen to Steve Bannon talk about the strategy and the ideas behind it, was, you know, the American elite and Western elites more generally are sort of trying to sell the public on this idea of managed decline. You know, we've had our time. We've been the dominant civilization in the world. And let's just, you know, China's coming and the Asian and the Africans, you know, they're going to be the future. And we just have to manage our decline. And Donald Trump came in and went, no, we want to be great again. And you know, whatever your views on him and his policies and whatever, it's kind of irrelevant. My point is, it really depends on who you elect and who we elect here in the UK. And if we continue to elect people who are unwilling to stand up for Western values, who are unwilling to say, you know, that they're happy for America to be the strongest country in the world, who want to talk, you know, like one of the things as an outside observer, just listening to the way the conversations had in the United States, like I don't remember the last time I heard someone say something I used to hear when I was a kid, like every day, which was, that is un-American, right? It's almost like we don't remember who we are anymore. And that is, to me, the biggest problem. It's the collapse in Western self-confidence. So it really all depends on whether your country and mine can recapture that self-belief and self-confidence. And look, I say this as someone who opposed the invasion of Iraq, who opposed the invasion of Afghanistan. I don't think that it benefits the world for America to go sticking its finger in every pie and sticking its finger in everyone's business. On the other hand, there are also other things going on. I mean, that's why Ukraine is so different to Iraq and Afghanistan, because the United States did not invade Ukraine. And this is one of the things that I find so funny about these people who claim to be anti-war and anti-imperialist, when actually what they mean is they're pro the Russian Empire's attempt to rebuild itself by means of war. That is what they're actually saying, right? In effect. And I'm someone who opposes that, whether it's coming from the United States invading Afghanistan and Iraq, or whether it's Russia invading Ukraine. It's kind of the same thing going on.
Do you read it all into the fact that Donald Trump was elected in the United States, Boris Johnson, and even Zelensky, right? He's a comedian who eventually rose to become the president of a country. Those all happened around the same time. Is there anything that you kind of look at as connectivity, whether it was the mental state of various societies and countries all at the same time, or like it feels like there's something that it was in the water across multiple countries at the same time, and then they've kind of swung the pendulum back, and obviously we got Joe Biden here in the United States, and you can kind of see the knock-on effects in some of these other countries?
That's a really great observation, a really good question. I think there's some truth to that, and I think the truth is that the caliber of our politicians has been in a precipitous decline for some time. And so the only thing that gets the American people excited or the British public excited about voting for somebody is that they are outside the system. Mm-hmm. Right. And in Ukraine, a country I know pretty well, that was kind of the same. It's not like people liked Zelensky. It's that they really didn't like the other guys that were the political oligarchy that existed in the country at the time. And that's why he was elected. So I think you're right. I think our levels of dissatisfaction with our political class are such that we are willing to look almost anywhere to find somebody who can come in from the outside and lie to us that they're going to change things.
Yeah. One of the other ideas that I think is tangentially related to this that I've thought a lot about is for decades and decades, maybe even a century, the American dream was kind of this thing that was held up for people around the world. And quite literally, there's story after story after story of people who did all sorts of insanely risky things to get to the United States just for the possibility of having economic mobility and freedom and democracy and capitalism and all these things. But with the advent of the internet and global penetration of the internet, and many times in many of the developing countries, there seems to be this like exporting of the American dream now to anybody with an internet connection. And I always talk about like maybe a country like India, where you have over 1 billion people, and we now are starting to see literally kids with an internet connection and a cell phone or a computer being able to build companies and create some sort of economic mobility for themselves. How does that impact, one, I think society, but also two, who ends up getting elected to lead those people, right? If you were a country where there was no economic mobility and there was no, de facto American dream available, you had to leave. But now if you can stay, does that have a major impact on the politics of specific countries as well?
It's hard to say because I can't speak for the world because I don't know many countries, but certainly in Russia, I would argue that's not been the case at all. If you look at the fact that the support for the invasion is still quite high, even though it's going very badly for Russia. And it's because 80% of Russians get their news from TV. And so that 15%, the sort of liberal people in Russia who get their news elsewhere, they've all run away or become dissidents or become, the unofficial opposition or whatever. The overwhelming majority of the country are under the complete informational control of Vladimir Putin and his cronies. And likewise in China, it's not like, the Chinese give us TikTok, but it's not like they're all sitting there using Twitter and Facebook. They make their own stuff, and they don't let their people access things that are in the English language that they don't want to. And of course, the language barrier is also a very powerful thing. Most people in Russia and China don't speak English. So that sort of penetration, I'm sure it's having an effect. But as I look around the world right now, that does not seem to me to be what's determining who gets to be elected. And of course, it's a very westernized thinking, Western model of thinking, because in both Russia and China, who has public support isn't really what determines who becomes leader. Once they become leader, it's important for them to have public support, and they do things to retain it. But that isn't generally how the person who takes over the country is picked.
Yeah, it's I think the first time that I really started to understand how some of this occurs in other countries that maybe are not as democratic as the United States is I was reading Bill Browder's book Red Notice, and in it he was basically talking about Putin as a business adversary, right? Or just another, businessman. And then eventually kind of walks through how the rise of power. And so it sent me down this deep rabbit hole. And then in your talk, actually, that everyone seems to be very receptive to, you talk about Xi Jinping and his rise and kind of how his father was actually really, treated poorly, very poorly by the ruling class. And now all of a sudden, Xi Jinping has risen to be the leader of that class. And so that is not a story that is common in the United States, mainly because we just have a different system and a system that, frankly, probably would not allow those individuals to be able to rise in power because the tactics they used are negated here in the United States, right?
But also, I don't think you'd have a cultural revolution in which a bunch of people are arrested and thrown into jail, right, as well. So I think that's also a product of that.
Well, it's funny because I remember a friend of mine in a now deleted tweet, but right when the pandemic started, he tweeted out something and he basically said, the lockdowns never could happen in the United States because people value their freedom too much. And then I remember a couple of months later, we were in the middle of the lockdown and I said to myself, I actually agreed with the tweet when he said it. Right. And here we are. And so I do wonder how much of the ideals, the ethos, many of the things that people, I think, kind of hold up on this spotlight of the United States, when it's actually put to the test. Do they really believe these things? Are they willing to have the individual personal sacrifice to uphold them? Or is it something that you can talk about in quote unquote peacetime and in good times, but when the bad times come, humans are humans and they just succumb to, whatever the easiest path is?
I think that's definitely true. But I think it's also partly about what I said earlier, which is if you don't continue to talk confidently about what Western values are, then when it comes to a decision like lockdown, well, if we don't really believe in individual liberty, then why not do a lockdown, right? If we don't really talk about how bodily autonomy is important. I mean, people do. Interestingly, those are the same people that demanded vaccine mandates when it came to it in many places. But if we don't really remember that, one of the core tenets of Western values is that the individual is sacred and is empowered to make their own decisions about their own lives and their own bodies and so on, then it becomes easier to sell people on this sort of collective action. And I'm not saying collective action is always a bad thing or always unnecessary. If your country gets invaded, everybody has to get together and fight, right? And of course, in the early stages of the pandemic, it was hard to tell what exactly was going on. But once we'd allowed the government to instill the fear of God into people by brainwashing them through the media.
What's going on, guys? I hope you're enjoying this conversation with Konstantin. And I hate to interrupt, but Konstantin said a couple of things that YouTube doesn't like. And so we've decided to censor ourselves before YouTube had the opportunity to take this video down. As I've mentioned in the past, we don't want to have to censor ourselves, but YouTube has rules that we have to agree to. And so I'm going to let you all know every time that we get censored. Right now, Konstantin is saying something that YouTube doesn't like, and so this is my warning that yes, you are not seeing the full interview due to those rules. You'll probably see me again later on in the conversation. I'm sorry, but that's just the way that the game is played. All right, let's get back into this conversation with Konstantin. I hope you guys enjoy it.
That's kind of how people reacted. And if you don't keep reminding people that, freedom has trade-offs like anything else. We talked about no solutions, only trade-offs. Freedom comes with danger. And the United States was built by people who believed that, who understood that, and who were happy with that deal, right? But if the more you move away from the way that your country was built and founded, because you forget your own values and what it's built on, the more you're likely to import stuff from other cultures. You got to understand, lockdowns are not the sort of thing that would have been created in the West. It is a product of a communist party that has complete control over its country. and they exported it everywhere. And this isn't me spitballing here. Neil Ferguson, who was the guy who was largely responsible for lockdowns and our COVID policy here in the United Kingdom, who later, by the way, had to resign because he was visiting his mistress in the middle of the very lockdowns that he encouraged. He said, we didn't know it was possible until the Chinese did it.
It's crazy that got exported like that. But I also think that there's a number of ideas in society that have now come from other countries and kind of infiltrated the West. And I think that's one of your main points across your speech, and then many of the things that you talk about on a day-to-day basis is if you have these Western ideals and you know who you are, which is a key piece to it, then it is easy to identify that idea is not part of who we are. We do not actually accept that logic. But when all of a sudden that becomes controversial to say, I am an American, I am British, I have these ideals, I have these ethos, and you don't have the identity in order to repel bad ideas, you kind of fall for anything, right? It's the old adage of if you don't stand for something, you fall for nothing. And I think that's maybe your biggest message that you continue to bring across all of these different topics.
I agree. I think that's right. I think that's where so many of our problems come from, is the inability to define who you are. And the problem we have is less the case in America, thankfully, but in Britain, like you come up to somebody and you say, what are British values? They're going to look at you like you're trying to, catch them out or make them look bad or give them opportunity to hang themselves with their own rope, because to even suggest that there's such a thing as British values, that they should be defended, defined and maybe even defended. This is controversial stuff, as you say, and that is crazy.
There's a gentleman, Rob Henderson, who coined the term luxury beliefs. And
had him on the show to talk about it. Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. So this idea of luxury beliefs, when I heard you talking about climate change and the fact that the impact of climate change is going to be determined by the poor countries or the developing countries, not necessarily the most developed nations. That's the first thing that jumped to my mind is, wow, what a luxury it is for a developed nation to think that they can impact this. Can you describe a little bit more in terms of what exactly you're looking for over the next couple of years from the developing nations to really determine how this will play out?
Well, I don't think it needs to be as complicated than that. I just think it's the universal constant human truth that people want to live a better life than they lived yesterday, and they want their children to live a better life than they do. And if you've got a population of 1 billion in China and 1.4 billion in India, a lot of whom are poor, they're going to be industrializing as rapidly as they possibly can to deliver economic growth and prosperity for their people. And by the way, again, it's not me saying it. I watched the Indian oil minister talking about this the other day, and he was being challenged on why they're buying Russian oil. And he was like, we have an obligation to our consumer to provide energy. Like, they, as I said in my speech, they're not, of course, look, everyone who believes in climate change is concerned about its impact, and there are people in China and people in India who are working on that. But the point is, they are not going to sit there and go, oh, you guys spent 200 years industrializing, and now we're just going to remain poor because we're all concerned about climate change. And so that's why I think the solution to all of these problems is going to be technological. And as we talked about right at the start, the West is best placed to deal with that.
Yeah. When you look forward, are there certain types of information outside of kind of YouTube that you really look for? So one of the things that I've looked at and struggled with, I think alongside many others, is every single one of these, whether they're geopolitical conflicts, whether they're things around mandates, whether they are things around the vaccines and COVID or anything else. Where do you get your information? How do you evaluate information you see to actually know what is true or what is worth putting weight to versus it's either propaganda or it's something that could even just be, some sort of person on Twitter who's trying to get people riled up and posting some random video from 5 years ago? Like, what is your process like from getting information and really vetting it? Hey guys, I hope that you're enjoying this conversation. As you probably realize, we don't run any ads on this show. That's right. All the other podcasts, all the other YouTube shows that you watch, they have advertisers. We don't have any direct relationships with advertisers, and we simply create this because we enjoy doing it. Now that we do that though, we have a team. And if you'd like to support us, One way you can do that is to go subscribe to the Pomp letter. It's a daily letter that I write to about 235,000 people about my personal opinion on financial markets, business, technology, and Bitcoin. Just go to pompletter.com and you can sign up there. I'd love to have you join us, and it's a great, easy way to support the work that the team and I are doing on a daily basis. All right, let's get back into this conversation.
That's a really good question. And I think it's actually something that everybody's struggling with right now. Like, there is no answer, really. The one thing that I found, and for me, the war in Ukraine was a very interesting example of this, because I instantly saw people with whom I often agree, who had no idea, they could not find Ukraine on a map. And initially, they were all looking to me to give them my view. Right. And they were like, oh, wow, you did that interview with Francis on trigonometry. You know, it's got like 500,000 views or whatever it was. Like, great. You know, that was fascinating. Thank you for this. And then 2 weeks later, they like had a narrative and it was locked in. And they knew, and they would argue with, like, 2 weeks ago, this guy was asking me for my opinion. Now he knows better than me what's happening in Ukraine. So if you watch people over time, you can see who, like, the number one rule I have is I try not to comment on things I don't understand, right? So if you ask me about something that I don't understand, I'll just say, I don't know. People who comment on everything are largely going to be unreliable sources of information, number one. Number two, the problem we have as well is, like, there's this meme online, I don't know if you're familiar with it, which is, I believe the current thing. And that's kind of how, like, the people who think they've got past the propaganda, they think that the people who still believe the propaganda are, like, brainwashed to believe the current thing. But there's also this other thing, which is, I oppose the current thing, which is the exact opposite. Like, if the mainstream media is saying it, it must not be true. Well, that's not quite how it works. So the way I've try to do is I listen to different people. I see who is a reliable actor over time, whose predictions tend to be accurate and who's not. And that's kind of how I get my information.
I want to talk about Jordan Peterson and Greta Thunberg, who I think represent maybe two extremes in the world. And there's plenty of people who disagree with one and like the other and vice versa. Maybe we can start with Greta. I've seen you call her Saint Greta of climate change. Obviously at Oxford, Peter Thiel had a number of comments to say about her as well. Why do you think she has been so effective in terms of becoming the face and the voice of the climate change movement?
You can't criticize her.
Interesting.
That's
Explain.
why. Well, she's a child, right? So what, you're going to pick on a vulnerable autistic child? Were you some kind of monster? Right? It's a very effective shield against criticism and discussion and debate. And if you think about what she did, it's not like she went around educating people about the climate. That wasn't her role. Her role was to chastise people. Her role was to say, come back to the ideology that we talked about earlier. It's almost like a religious cult. You know, whether you, and I'm not talking about climate change, I'm talking about the ideology of net zero and reducing consumption and all of this stuff, right? Because climate change is a separate thing. That's a scientific matter. How you deal with it is also a scientific matter, but it's also a matter of logic. Like, as I said in my speech, if we produce 2% of global carbon emissions, it doesn't matter if we turn the lights off and never turn them again. Turn them on again. It's not going to make any difference, right? So the fact that people are demanding that we make ourselves really poor all of a sudden, that is not a rational demand. That is not a rational thing. And how do you get people to do irrational things? Well, you can't persuade them rationally. So you have to emotion, blackmail, whatever it is, right? And a child who is upset and crying on stage is the perfect method by which to achieve that emotional impact, right? So I have no issue with Greta Thunberg herself. I think she's a child that has been badly let down by her parents and other adults around her who have encouraged her to go down this path, which I think in the end will turn out to have been quite harmful for her, I'm afraid. So that's my take on her. I just think she's being used by people for their own political purposes.
I saw the video of her being arrested, and I'll kind of put that, maybe in air quotes. And what I think surprised me was not her or others trying to get photo ops. I think that most of the times we see content, I always ask myself, why are we seeing this and why now, right? Actually, it was more so the participation of the police. I think I was saying to myself, what is going on? Are those real police officers? Right? Why are they doing this? Why are they participating? And so I don't know if you have any thoughts there in terms of, what seemed to be kind of photo op made, situations, but it was also with what appears to be real police officers. Like, do you have a read on that?
No, not really. I don't know enough about it, to be honest.
Yeah. The other thing that you did, as I mentioned, was you wrote a piece on why they hate Jordan Peterson. And he seems to be on the opposite end of the spectrum from a Greta Thunberg in terms of at least society's response and also, I think, a certain type of individual who is drawn to that message. Why do they hate Jordan Peterson?
There are many reasons, of course. There's always, it's not a one thing. But I think that, look, I need to preface this because it's important, because the Cliff Notes version is they hate him because he wants men to be better. And he has a positive message for men. But I don't believe that, the answer for men is to whine and complain. Right. So I'm not into men's rights movements because I just don't think, more than anything else, I don't think they're effective. Forget about how they behave and the morality and the whatever. I don't think people, we're biologically different and we're programmed to have sympathy for women and we're programmed to consider men disposable. That is the biological reality. You're not going to change it. Men creating movements where they protest and complain about the rights isn't going to change anything. Men just have to be better and work harder and, look after their own interests. And one of the things about the interests of men is to find women who want to be with them and who don't hate men, right? That's really how you solve that problem at an individual level. But the reason they hate Jordan Peterson is he came out and he unapologetically wanted men to be better. He wanted everyone to be better. And that's one of the other reasons they didn't like him, of course. But also he challenged the ideology. And the reason I say this, people will think I'm being sort of conspiratorial or whatever, but if you cast your mind back to the Kathy Newman interview and all of that, he did also an interview for GQ with a woman called Helen Lewis who's interviewed me. And they all, I don't remember if she asked him this specifically, but lots of other journalists all kept saying to him, yeah, but the majority of your audience are men. What is that? Like it was a bad thing. No one goes to a cosmetics company and says, the majority of the audience are women. Why is that? Because there's nothing wrong with women, but there's something wrong with men in their worldview. And we hear it in the language of wokeness. You're just a straight white man. You're a toxic masculinity. You're toxic this, toxic that. And I think the reason that Jordan Peterson came under attack is because not only was he trying to tell men and women, but particularly men, to be better, he also embodied traditional masculine virtues that people don't want to see men exhibit in the world.
What do you think the one or two top masculine attributes are that people don't want to see?
Confidence, strength, right? Someone who's not going to back down, someone who's going to, fight his corner all the way. Again, because people are stupid, I have to say this. I'm not saying women can't be strong and confident, right? But we don't like to see men express those things. If you look at movies, if you look at television shows, if you look at stand-up, the guy's always the goof, the idiot, the this, the that. It's weak, pathetic, and the woman is the girl boss and whatever. That's what apparently these people want to see. So they didn't want to see a guy who would come along and go, actually, no, you're wrong about that. And I'm gonna make the argument and I'm gonna argue the case and I'm gonna persuade you. And if you don't agree with me, well, you're wrong. They don't want to see that. They want to attack him and then for him to back down.
Yeah. It is interesting that you mentioned movies. I think there's been a very, very big difference between even people who are cast for certain roles, but the storylines of many of these movies, right? You start to see, I always joke, the movie version of the mannequins inside of the store where they used to be what essentially looked like ripped, models, and now they've got dad bods. And that's celebrated to a degree. You also are starting to see some of that in movies where the hero or whatever actually doesn't look or act the same way that they would have 10, 15, 20 years ago, and definitely not 50 years ago. And I do wonder how much of that is programming children's mind who then will grow to be adults and has a long-term impact versus, they watch a movie and then they go and they see, a sports star on television where it can't be faked. Like you can't be fat and be in the NBA. Right? For the most part, like you have to be an athletic person who is able to actually accomplish the task. And so
what about Zion Williamson?
Who?
Zion Williamson. Like he's a chunky guy. I was just trying to make a joke.
He would say that he is muscular without the definition.
Mate, he's probably way more athletic than me. So I'm just joking. Don't hit me, Zion. But I know what you mean. Look. The media, the Hollywood, they're powerful machines for communicating stereotypes to people, right? That's what it's about. And if all you see when you're growing up is men who are weak and pathetic, then people are going to take that message to heart. Now, of course, some people will rebel against that. But my worry is not only that, it's also like, and I talk about this in my Substack about Jordan, why they hate Jordan Peterson, is like, I don't know if you've noticed this, but there's been an explosion in people going to the gym specifically to look buff, not to like be healthy or whatever, but to like look buff. Like it's a look thing for a lot of people. And my view on it is, and again, it's something it's a theory. I'm not saying this is necessarily true, but it's the one area where men are still allowed to express authentic masculinity. Like you are allowed to go to the gym and lift weights. That's not toxic, not yet. There will be a time when that becomes toxic as well, right? And there are already articles about how going to the gym and being healthy is right wing, like they're already writing them. But it's the one area where men can go and be men and show up in the world as men. And I think that's why it's kind of displaced masculinity. And that worries me to some extent. Don't get me wrong. Gym is healthy. Gym is great. Exercise is great. Lifting's great. All of that stuff is great. But some people now think that to be a man is to look like a man. And that is not what being a man is about at all. Being a man is about how you carry yourself in the world, what kind of father you are, what kind of husband you are, what impact you have on the world, what kind of leader you are. These are the things that make a man a man. You don't have to be. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, that can't be the only place that men channel their energy to be masculine. Like that energy that people spend going to the gym, you might want to spread that around a bit in terms of some other things. That's all I'm saying.
The last thing I want to talk to you about is Bitcoin. And actually, we haven't talked about this, so I have no clue if you know anything about Bitcoin, if you're interested in it at all. But a lot of, I think, your view of the world aligns pretty closely with people who are interested or use Bitcoin. Have you spent any time on it? Do you have any thoughts there around the asset?
Yeah, so I bought half a Bitcoin in like about 2010, maybe something like that. I don't remember when. I bought half a Bitcoin when at the time it cost me about £400. So it's about $600.
Okay. So probably 2012, 2013-ish time, although right. I'm not a currency converter expert.
Yeah. And I only bought it because like people were talking about it. I was like, let's throw an amount of money. I'm not going to miss at it. And then it like doubled in price. A few years later, I was like, "Oh, great!" and I sold it. So I got $1,200 back for it. Obviously, regret that now. But I'm afraid I'm going to trigger you and the entire audience by saying that I don't know. I'm not an expert. I'm not qualified. So I'm not saying this is my like professional opinion or anything like that. I get the feeling that this is a giant scam and pyramid scheme that's going to collapse very soon. That's just my feeling. I don't have any great explanation of it. I can explain some of it to you if you want, but that's my sense of it.
So it's fascinating to hear this. I've had a couple of people come on who have similar ideas, and talking through it, actually, the audience really enjoyed. So I'd love to hear kind of why you think that, or kind of what are some of the data points maybe that have kind of built up in your mind that's led to it.
early 1990s Russia, you got to think you've got a communist system that's just collapsed. You don't have a free market economy. You don't have advertising on TV for products. Everything's brand new. Like, imagine you just like, you popped out of the womb straight into like a capitalist world. That's kind of how it was. And we had this thing called Triple M. And every day there would be an advert, a commercial on TV. They'd be like, oh, I bought this Triple M thing and it's doubled in price. You know, I said to my friend, go and get it. And he got it and it's doubled in price as well. And we're making loads of money. And like that continued for a long time. And my dad, who was financially literate, I kept saying to him, Dad, we've got to buy some of this. And he was like, son, this is going to collapse. Watch. And of course, eventually it did. It was a giant pyramid scheme. I'm not saying that Bitcoin in and of itself doesn't have value, because I think that the technology itself may turn out to be quite useful. In fact, it almost certainly will do. But when what I see like out there, when I open my phone and I scroll Twitter or whatever, is like a hot girl going, why don't you invest in crypto? You know, like there is a big industry now around pushing people to buy this as a way to make money. And I fundamentally don't believe that you can make, I believe that money is produced by contributing and creating something productive, right? Financial speculation is financial speculation, right? So if you're playing Bitcoin as like a stock, you go, it might go up as well as go down. Cool. Then you know what you're doing. You're gambling in the great casino of life, and that's fine. But is it something that's going to generate value? I'm very skeptical about that. And we just did an interview, which we haven't released yet, but we will be, with a guy called Mike Green. He used to be Peter Thiel's personal. You're familiar with him?
Mike right. Green and I have had many debates in public on this topic, so he's the perfect person to get the other side of the perspective from.
Right. Well, I have to say I've listened to both sides of the argument. Now, listen, man, I want to remind people what I just said. I don't understand this area. I'm not an expert, and I put that up front, right? But I'm more persuaded by his argument than the other argument.
So there's two, I think, main things that I would kind of respond with that, again, maybe won't change your mind, but I think are important to understand. So the first is when you think of the crypto industry, there's like 20,000 of these tokens at this point, right? Yeah. I think one of the big points is like Bitcoin is very separate than the other 19,999, yes. Right?
Everything I said, I can be applied to Bitcoin in my opinion. So
okay,
that's what I mean.
Okay, so
I think it applies even to Bitcoin, but all the other tokens even more so. Yeah,
correct. Definitely to the other tokens. And when it comes to Bitcoin, I think there's two kind of fundamental things that I believe, and I think many people in the Bitcoin community believe. The first is the idea of like the production of money, right? So one of the things that obviously has driven fiat currencies and these national currencies are central banks and the centralized control, and there's a reason why they do it and kind of how they run the economy. When you separate money from the state in terms of Bitcoin, you need something to replace those organizations, right? And so what has essentially replaced it is kind of a two-step process. One, there is a programmatic monetary policy that's coded that can't be changed by anyone. And two is you have the miners who are helping to produce the Bitcoin, right? They are securing the network. They are doing this. It is now the strongest computer network in the world. It's the most decentralized, yada, yada. And so I think that one of the things that becomes really interesting is if you think right now in the world, you have in the United States, a country that's been experiencing 6, 7, 8% compounding inflation now for multiple years. UK, very similar all around the world. You also have things like the debt limit in the United States where people are saying, hey, US treasuries, I thought were the safest asset. Now, I don't think the US is going to default, but there's some hysteria here. Maybe I should go seek out something else. And then you also have people around the world who say, you know what? I just want something that I can use. And if you go to the extreme and you look at Venezuela or Zimbabwe, right? If I can't actually get US dollars because it's dangerous or they're going to get confiscated, the next best thing is to get something where I can just simply hold on to it, right? I have sovereignty over an asset. And so just as you had mentioned earlier that there's this like luxury belief in the developed world around climate change and some of these things, I actually believe that there is this luxury belief around money in the developed world. And there's this gentleman, Alex Gladstein, who you should have on the show. He is at the Human Rights Foundation, and he talks all the time about financial privilege. So if you or I go to the bank or to the ATM, we're able to easily get money out. We can send money, right? No one is trying to stop us from doing that or confiscate our assets. But there are many places around the world where that's not necessarily true. And that's where kind of Bitcoin as a pure technology, forget about the speculation on that, pure technology has value for those individuals. Now, how big is that market? How pervasive will that be? Will those people eventually get to financial privilege? All up for debate. When it comes to the financial speculation, I actually think you're 100% right, and I would agree with you. People who are using this to simply get rich probably will end up being hurt because you have an asset that the world does not yet know what the value is. Bitcoin community thinks it'll be worth a lot more in the future. Bitcoin critics, Mike Green and others, believe it'll be worth way less in the future. And so naturally you have a market, there'll be volatility. And so the speculators usually end up getting run over, similar to, I think, the triple M that you described in Russia. Yeah. And so the one piece that I think I'll leave you with when it comes to Bitcoin is I actually think you're a Bitcoiner. Maybe you just haven't realized it yet, in that I look at Bitcoin personally and I say, Bitcoin to me has taken the American ethos and ideals, things like free speech, and codified it, right? It is the ability for anyone to send economic value to anyone else without asking permission of a third party. It allows for a true free market asset that is traded 24/7, 365 with no intervention from external sources. And then I think the third thing is it allows for individuals to have private property rights in a technological sense in a digital world, which, as we know, if you compare Russia, China, and other communist countries, private property rights are incredibly important for the foundation of capitalism, democracy, et cetera. And so what I try to separate is like the asset from the price. Because I think price, like I've been a fool in the past just as much as anyone else and been like, oh, I think the price is going to go up or down or sideways or whatever. You're always wrong. But when you look at the actual technology, it's almost as if they were able to take these ideals, which I think you and I probably agree vehemently on, and say, okay, let's put them into a piece of technology and now go ahead and allow anyone in the world to access it. So I don't expect to change your mind, but I do think that there's these elements of what you believe that actually are codified in Bitcoin. And if you can separate out price from technology, then I think the technology piece kind of resonates and fits nicely with many of the things that you've talked about today.
Well, I think some of that makes sense to me. I suppose, and look, we've had Safety Amos on the show to talk. So like we've had the pro and anti Bitcoin case. I'm just saying I'm more convinced by the financial speculation part of it troubles me, but also, I spend quite a bit of time in third world countries. I don't see anyone using Bitcoin there there are people using Bitcoin there, but like, I'm not walking around and like Bitcoin. Everyone's like talking about it and using it to transfer money and stuff like that. It may, once you have infrastructure, maybe that will be what happens with it. And in terms of, I would separate, I may agree with the values of Bitcoin. That doesn't mean the values of Bitcoin are a reality, in the sense that, again, this is a very low res version of what people say, but like, private property and the government is, you can do whatever you want with your money. The government is not gonna, come on, death and taxes, man. The government is going to find a way to screw you. That's what the government's job is. The government's job is to find you and to take some of your money. That's what they do best.
Yeah. Well, I think that a nuance to that, right, is like in America, we have private property rights, but still the government gets paid taxes. The government still prevents you from doing certain things and all of that. It's more so what it allows for you to do is have the private property right in the digital realm, right? Before Bitcoin, there really was no way to have kind of the private property rights. So I do think that this is actually a really, really important point, because many people look at the Bitcoin community and they hear private property rights as an example, like, oh, they're all anarchists. They all want to take down the government. And I actually think, as I've met many, many people in the community, they're like, no. I actually believe in the United States. I believe in democracy. I believe in capitalism. I believe in all this. And that's why I'm a Bitcoiner, right? Is that these private property rights, I think, are going to be essential. And some of them will even go as far as to say, look, I think that the governments will need this asset as we get kind of deeper and deeper into these debt cycles and things like that. Again, all up for debate. I know that you've got to run, so I don't want to keep you much longer. Where can we send people to find you online and also to pick up your book if they're interested?
Well, first of all, before we do that, I should just say I enjoyed hearing your take on it, and I'm always open, particularly on things I don't know anything about, to hear different sides and get new information. So I really enjoyed that part of our conversation. In terms of everything else, the book is called An Immigrant's Love Letter to the West. You can get it on Amazon. Read my Substack. Just search for my name, Konstantin Kisin Substack. And the YouTube show is Trigonometry. It's also available as a podcast on Spotify and everywhere else. Those are the things that I do, and I really appreciate you having me on.
Konstantin, I really appreciated this conversation. I learned a lot. And frankly, I think there's a lot of people around the world who not only appreciate your message, but also the way that you deliver the message. So please keep it up, and we will definitely do this again in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me.